I know the classic fight of like socks on the ground, like brings this big argument. It's like, it's not about the socks, it's about what you're feeling in that. Like, are you feeling unheard in that moment? And does that bring you back to your 8-year-old self? And how can we start to understand that and understand what's underneath it so that it's not just like, oh, these socks are super annoying right now. It's like, oh, I'm feeling unheard. How can I start to work to heal that part of me and start shifting the pattern of how I respond in that? I think what I would call it is just kind of like a pain point that pops up, and then we cope in different ways. Like I said, like if you notice you're coping in an unhealthy way or coping in a way that you think like, hey, there's probably a different way or like a healthier way to cope with it, then I'd say it's time to jump into a session and try to figure out like, why am I coping this way and how can I cope differently? I really like a range of different clients. When I think about what is kind of like the similarity behind the different clients, I think what comes to mind is like transitions, like different transitions in life. Like I really enjoy college students, the transition of like independence in that, or like working with new moms and the transition into like what that looks like in their life or the transition into marriage. Like I think working with people who are like in that space of trying to figure out like what does life look like in this season, I think that's my ideal, which is pretty broad, but I think that's what I've really found to enjoy, like kind of figuring out what new seasons look like. Yeah, that's a lot of like what I notice in the work with different people of like different transitions really highlight the pattern, but the pattern's been happening for years, like since childhood usually, or since different like wounds. And then we just really highlight like what is that pattern and how can we shift it and how can we identify it more in the moment. I think there's probably different signs, and I think it, of course, depends on the person. But I think, like, in those transitions, like noticing stressors or noticing different patterns that are coming up. Like, I know a lot of my work is like diving into the patterns that we notice of like how you're reacting to different things. So, like, if you notice that there's a lot of stress and then you're reacting in ways of like isolating yourself or reacting in ways of like escalating, like noticing those different patterns and saying like, hey, like I'm noticing this is continuing to happen. It doesn't feel like the healthiest way to cope with this transition or this stressor. Like it's time to talk through and notice what those patterns are so that I can start shifting those. I was going to say, I think like my approach can be really beneficial for individuals, but also really beneficial for couples. Like those same patterns that I was talking about that we can figure out with individuals, those patterns and cycles are happening in couples. Like one couple or one partner in the marriage does something that triggers something from the past in one partner, and then usually it turns into this cycle that happens, and then we can do the work like I was describing before individually, but doing it with the partner to grow empathy for each other and to grow understanding and then start shifting those cycles together. Yeah, I really like clients to just explore like inwardly, like what is going on and think back to like those origins of like when did that hurt happen and how can I like have some grace for myself in that moment, but also have the self-awareness in the moment to start shifting those patterns. I will. I know it's not as ideal as, like, sitting in the room, but I know there's a lot of couples, like I spoke earlier about, like, in transition and, like, with new kids and, like, transitioning in different ways, and then virtual seems to be a pretty ideal way to, like, the kids are in bed, can't leave, you don't wanna pay for a sitter, so let's hop on Zoom and jump into it and dive into it as well as we can virtually. Yeah, I think that's a great question. So I'm sure some people kind of get stuck with that of like, is this enough? Is this not enough? But I know like sometimes there's different things highlighted in couples work. that working individually on those different patterns or different patterns that you're noticing continuing to come up, then working individually on those things can really benefit the couple's work and even make the couple's work go quicker than it would have if there was so much time and energy put on some of those individual patterns sitting together in couples work, if that makes sense.